Thank you, Justin. Justin will put in the chat some information about Berkeley Judicial Institute, but long story short, now that we have you here, we would love to have you back. We are grateful that you're spending the time with us today, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program, which is the 8th in our series on judges in the press. Here we're focusing on what courts could be doing now to promote public understanding. It's a pleasure to briefly introduce our extraordinary faculty. I promise I could take all our time talking about them, but I don't think that would serve the interest of our group. You'll find biographical links for each in the chat. Our moderator today is Aaron Katersky, who's a justice correspondent for ABC News. He'll be in conversation with Judge Maryam Ahmad, who's of the Circuit Court of Cook County in Chicago, Judge Jeremy Fogel, who's not yet joined us, but will be here any moment, director of Berkeley Judicial Institute and retired state and federal court judge from California, Judge Kimberly Mueller, who's a U.S. District Court judge for the Eastern District of California, and Judge Trina Thompson, U.S. District Court judge from the Northern District of California. Special thanks to Judge Marcia Krieger, U.S. District Court Judge from Colorado, and to Charlie Hall from the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts for encouraging BJI to offer this series. Huge thanks to our moderator and our faculty for their work today. As a reminder, we'd love to hear from you about the good things that you're doing in your courts. Please use the chat to let us know those things. We'll post an anonymized version of the chat on the Berkeley Judicial Institute program site. And with all of that as preface, let's get to it. Aaron, where will we start today?
Hi, Denise. Thank you. It's great to be with you all. Your honors, thank you so much. It feels like we are covering courts and what happens in them all the time, and not just a high-profile trial or two. I just got done with Sean Combs in New York, but about emergency motions, emergency hearings, and I know on my side, we are always interested in what's in your head. And I know that it's not always possible to get in your head, but I wondered if we could start with your perception of people like me, and therefore the public, if we are a conduit to the public, and where things are working and where things might need a little improvement. Judge Mueller, just by pick of the litter, if you'd like to begin, because I know it's of interest to all of us to get it right.
Yeah, thank you so much to BJI for the opportunity to participate today and to learn from all of you. And thank you, Aaron, for facilitating. As one judge, as a former chief judge as well, I see you and your colleagues as incredibly important translators of what we do in our courts. I do think judges have a responsibility to make us clear what it is we're doing to the parties and to the general public, but by the very nature of our jobs, we cannot worry about how the public is going to judge us or what the public thinks. And so one thing we wrestle with, I believe, is how do we do our job of looking just at the record of a case, listening only to the parties in the case, applying the law, taking our oath seriously. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution. How do we do all that? And also at the end of it, take account of the fact that the public does need to understand, and the press as the best interpreter for the public needs to understand what we have done. I think all of us here understand we need the public's trust. It is only with the public's trust that we function properly. We don't have armies to enforce our orders. We depend on our orders, bench orders, written orders to be respected. And so your role in helping to ensure the public understands us is incredibly valuable, Aaron. Thank you for what you do.
Oh, it's my honor. Please, Judge Thompson, how are we doing? Is the communication working?
I think the communication is working. I've had a fluid relationship with the press, both when I was on the state bench in Alameda County, California, and also since I've been on the district court. And just as my colleague Judge Mueller said, it's our job to make it plain, to make it make sense, and making sure that our orders have clear headers, that they have clear introductory commentary so that when the press has that, tight deadline, they can glean what actually it is that we're trying to convey. It also, I think, assures the community that we're working with integrity. And so when the press is there and the perceptions that are outlined in your own commentary also gives us some pause, but usually our heads are down and we're working really hard. And so we rely upon you to have clarity and to be able to convey that information to the public.
Judge Ahmad, you're sitting in Chicago where absolutely nothing is happening that requires court intervention. Where are we, and how's your experience been with people like me?
I'll start with the second part of your question. My relationship has been mercurial, but that's not a negative because the press serve as a conduit, an important conduit between what happens here, often behind closed doors, to the public. And sometimes those communications are accurate. Sometimes those communications are not. However, what's important, at least for me as a judge, is that that communication is happening.
Is that easily facilitated? Because so often we can't talk to you.
Well, I disagree. And here's why. You can't talk to me about a case, a particular case that I'm presiding over, or for commentary about an issue that might come before me. But sure, you can come and talk to me about what happens in the courtroom, things that we do, information we would like the public to know. And I think if conversations actually happened more along that vein initially, many of my colleagues would actually feel more comfortable with members of the press coming to them in times such as what you referenced at the beginning when you introduced me, in times of turmoil and great activity in the community and in the courts.
Judge Mueller, when you see a reporter in your courtroom, is that a welcome presence, or is that something you don't even notice?
Unless the reporter is like a former Sacramento Bee reporter who no longer graces our courtrooms, he would sit in the jury box. Then I knew he was there. Otherwise, courtrooms are public and anyone is welcome. And unless a reporter is a repeat player, I'm not going to know who that person is. And I would hope I wouldn't shade what I'm saying or the way I'm acting based on a reporter's presence. But if I knew someone were there, I would welcome that person. Occasionally, we have reporters ask for the ability to have their iPads connected to the internet. So I know that someone's there. I always approve that because I understand how that can relate to the ability to report in real time. But I welcome that. And I would echo what Judge Ahmad has said, that individual judges, chief judges, clerks of court, I think would be well served by developing relationships to repeat players if those reporters are coming to the courthouse on a regular basis, having that line of communication open and having the reporter understand when a judge simply can't say anything because it's about a case over which that judge is presiding.
And what's working in that regard? How do we best demystify the court for reporters and therefore for their audiences and the public?
I think at this point, in most of our courts, most of our federal courts, it is it's judge by judge or clerk by clerk. Very few federal courts have public information officers. Some are starting, and that's a very hopeful sign, I believe. Some district courts of which I'm aware. Circuits often have a media contact. The Supreme Court has public information officers. So those people are available. And I would encourage any reporter to go to those persons and ask questions about the details that just aren't clear at all. I've taken advantage of relationships I have with reporters. Whenever we're in the same space, we sit down and talk. And very often I've found reporters have very specific questions, having studied a docket. You know, what's going on here? I can't figure out what's going on. And if I can answer that question, I am happy to do that. Anything I can do as one judge, or anything I can do to support building an infrastructure of people who can answer those kind of curious questions, I'm all in.
Right on.
And I want to add the breaking news that Judge Fogel is here and available to speak.
Oh, Judge Fogel, hello, Your Honor. It's so nice to participate with you. Please jump in, and we'd love to hear more about your experience with people like me, reporters, where you think the communications are working and where they may need some improvement.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that I'm so late and I missed the very beginning. I'm going to blame it all on the air traffic controllers in Chicago, because that was how I got here. And I'm just glad I was able to be here at all, and it's great to see everybody. And I think this is really an important topic. And I actually want to just adopt everything that I heard from the other judges. Building relationships is I think a real key here. And since I've been retired and I haven't had to be quite as careful, I've developed some really good relationships with reporters, and I talk to the media all the time. But even when I was sitting and had to be mindful of the code of conduct, there were probably half a dozen reporters who I really had gotten to know. And we had exactly the kinds of interactions that Judge Mueller was just talking about, and that, they would call and say, I don't understand what's happening in this particular procedure, or, can you explain to me how this works? It was never about gossip. I mean, they knew I couldn't comment on cases, but it was just trying to explain how the system works. And that made their reporting much more accurate, much more useful to the public. So I was really happy to do it. And I think sitting judges, even in light of Canons 3 and 4, can have those kinds of relationships, as long as you have the understanding that you can't talk about cases.
We really want to talk about cases, though.
Oh, yeah, you do. And sometimes we want to talk to you about cases. And I think that's particularly hard. That if there are cases you want to talk about, and that a reporter you have a relationship with wants to talk about that case, you just can't. And so, what I did, and I can be candid about this, is that I wouldn't talk about the case, but I would sort of talk about the larger context in which, and I would never talk about my cases, number one. So that was hard and fast. But if it was somebody else's case, I might talk about contextual things, so if a judge made an order that was very unusual, and I was being asked for comment on whether that order was unusual and why and how it was unusual, I say, well, I can't talk about it directly, but let me explain how this particular procedure works, and why, it would be interesting to follow up if I were in your shoes, on why the judge in that case didn't follow that particular protocol or that particular procedure. And so, it was a way of providing some context. And I think that's very useful too. I mean, I think, and I say this retrospectively, but I mean, I felt this way when I was an active judge too. I think we miss opportunities to educate the public by not working with the media. I just think this kind of allergy to talking to media is not a good thing.
I mean, no argument for me.
No, I know you weren't going to argue, and I know actually that the other judges feel the same way as I do, which is why we're all on this call. So
100%. And please, Your Honors, if you want to jump in, feel free. But Judge Thompson, the way that we do most often hear from those on the bench is through your writing. And I wondered if, Judge Thompson, you feel any particular obligations when you're crafting an opinion or an order. Do you have us in mind, the public in mind? Who's your audience?
My audience is the litigants, first and foremost, but I am also mindful of the fourth estate, as I call you, and the public, because it's an opportunity to educate the public on that portion of the case and to use that forum as an opportunity to do so. When I was early in my career, we used to have bench and press gatherings. So I learned the ethics for media. I had the pleasure of learning a lot from a lot of seasoned reporters and print reporters. And then as things evolved into blogging and social media, I believe that's when everybody started to pull back because it was much more difficult to determine whether something was going to get misinterpreted. So now a lot of my colleagues, including myself, may rely more on our written communication, and of course, our courtrooms are open to the press, and so they're able to see in real time what's going on. But I would really encourage educational forums with the bench and the press where we exchange what our obligations are, what our ethics are, because I think that would allow for a much more relaxed space where people will feel more comfortable sharing information.
Judge Ahmad, since the topic of bloggers was brought up, and to the extent you feel comfortable, I know that you've had a challenging relationship with some of us, not all of us, maybe. But I wondered if you'd share a little bit about the experience to the extent you're comfortable, and maybe what insight you've gained from it.
Sure. Certainly. And the most negative experience was not with a member of traditional media. I find that traditional media, when they come to court, are very respectful of courtroom protocol and procedures. I had a situation where I was presiding in a criminal courtroom, bond court. And so for those who understand the nature of felony criminal proceedings, particularly in a county such as Cook, where you have significant cases. I had a blogger, and this was right after everything opened back up post-COVID, who was in the courtroom. I didn't know this was a blogger. He was wearing no credentials. And he was conducting himself in what I consider to be a very disruptive way. And because the nature of our courtrooms is such that our deputies are really occupied with defendants, the burden sometimes falls on judges to monitor what's going on in the courtroom in terms of security. And so I said something to the person because of the way he was moving. And it turned out, long story short, it turned out this was a blogger, and he accused me of denying him the opportunity to write or read in the courtroom, which wasn't the case at all. I questioned who he was and what he was doing in light of the nature of the proceedings. And so if you Google me, that incident will come up from his point of view. And the frustrating aspect for me is that when, as a judge, you experience negative press, often there's no response. And so the only thing that is out there is that negative story. Be that as it may, I feel very committed to being transparent as a judge and as a court system. And so I now have a situation presently where a blogger came into my Zoom. The courtroom that I preside over now is predominantly Zoom. I had a reporter come in to do a story about another set of litigants on Zoom. I said to her, because the area where I preside now is very specialized, in your story, if you would like to learn what other attorneys do under these circumstances, you're more than welcome to come anytime you want and sit in my Zoom as an observer. And this reporter comes probably once or twice a week and has been doing that for the last 2 months. Learning, I'm in civil post-judgment now, learning this area of post-judgment civil litigation. I have a YouTube page with videos, how-to videos. She's watched all the videos. She has made a great effort to educate herself about this area of law. And I find it's sort of what Judge Fogel was saying. It's very refreshing when you see a reporter attempt to really understand a subject matter, because no matter what she writes about, because she understands now, or she will understand this area of law, her article will be infinitely more balanced and informative for her coming and making herself available to learn. And so I have these two extraordinary examples of bloggers from each perspective. And that difference is what inspires me to continue treading through this very difficult process.
May I just tag on to what Judge Ahmad said, because I think what she's saying is really important. There's a reporter who I have now probably sourced about 10 stories for. And when I first encountered him, he sort of had the idea that the courts were hiding stuff. I mean, there was just, I sort of got that vibe when I was talking to him that you know, he's, well, what is it that the courts are hiding? You know, why? And so I was as transparent and helpful as I could be on that story. And then we've had other stories, and now, you know, I'll hear from him every couple of months, and he's dealing with something that's kind of not front page news necessarily. You know, it might be something about recusals, or it might be something about what happens with the appointment of interim U.S. attorneys, or something like that, where the procedure is actually really not easy to understand. And instead of just saying, well, you know, what are the courts hiding, and what scandal can I expose today? It really is sort of this informational conversation that we have. And I really like his work. I mean, the stories he's written, I think, are very well informed, and that's really to his credit that he's really conscientious and trying to do that. But the fact is, he needed a judge to talk to, you know, and I think that's kind of what Judge Ahmad's talking about, that, you know, we can be sources for just, how does the system work? What does this mean? You know, and sometimes it's on something that we take for granted. Like, you know, what is the standard for a temporary restraining order? What does it mean that somebody issued a temporary restraining order? Well, you know, we all know that, but the people out in the community who are hearing the news don't know that. And so they can assign all sorts of meaning to it that it has or doesn't have. And we're the best sources for that. You know, they're not going to take instant crash courses on the law. So, you know, I think we have a real teaching function.
I will sign up for your class, Judge Fogel, on the appointment of U.S. attorneys, because I have questions about that process.
Well, Judge Mueller's court is going to be dealing with that, I think, pretty soon too. So,
so Judge Mueller,
yeah,
not necessarily specific to that, although yeah, I'm in. What else is, or what onus do you feel maybe on the individual judge? What can the individual judge do, in addition to maybe some of the clarity of writing that was mentioned earlier, to facilitate this process, to make their work a bit more accessible?
I think there are a number of things. I think what Judge Ahmad has done with her YouTube videos, it's brilliant. And she's, you know, there's obviously some minimum production value there, but it's pretty straightforward. And it's the judge talking with her dignified photo and in a reasoned, you know, straightforward way, bite-sized pieces of information. I think every court could take a page from that. In our court, almost every day we have the criminal duty calendar. So if people are looking to see what happens, they can go to a magistrate judge's courtroom and see arraignments, see detention hearings, perhaps some motion practice. And then at least once a week, most district judges are having a criminal law in motion calendar. even if we're not in trial, and we certainly have our fair share of trials, I think if it's not the judge or the chief judge, some representative of the court could provide those videos. And I think, videos are the way most people consume information these days. I'm old-fashioned. It's not my way, but I think we have to recognize that's a key way of communicating with people. I also saw a note in the chat I just want to echo. We can also look to proxies or take advantage of the fact that there are members of the bar, ABOTA, Federal Bar Association, members of the profession that can answer these questions, even if a judge cannot or a court doesn't have the infrastructure to be present. Very often local law schools, they're members of the faculty that are readily accessible to answer questions. So I think judges can be aware, can use our web pages. We all have web pages now. Judges in a courtroom can even, add on some information if they know there's a high school class watching. We often have high school classes. Next week, I'm going to have a UC Davis Law School civil procedure class, listening for references to the federal rules. We can at the end of the calendar say, I can take questions about what the process is here, not about any of the cases I heard. So judges can look for those opportunities, but I also think we need to work in community with our bars and our law schools to make certain anyone who's willing to help answer questions, educate, make certain we're better understood, is looped in.
Judge Ahmad, tell us about the origin of the YouTube video and what made you a YouTube sensation.
I'm not a YouTube sensation. I have a lot of self-represented litigants in my court call, and I have a very comprehensive standing order for my courtroom. I noticed that many of the self-represented litigants rely on cell phones for information. I know as a person over the age of 50 that it is very difficult for me to read text on cell phones. And most of the documents when I took over this court call, actually all of them were on PDF form. And so it made sense to me to communicate the same information via videos, because that would enable litigants to watch an image, to listen, to stop it, go back, replay it, take notes. And while I was thinking about how to best communicate this type of information, I met Judge Scott Schlegel, who Denise referenced in the chat, through Berkeley Judicial Institute. Going to Berkeley Judicial Institute changed my way of thinking and ability to provide resources here in Cook County. So that's how that came about. And for every aspect of litigation in my courtroom, I've created a video. And if I see a litigant struggling with something or asking a lot of questions about a particular topic, I'll look over at my clerk and I'll say, that'll be video number 12, or that'll be video number 13. And so I'm able to produce these videos. They're not boilerplates. They're actually me writing the scripts, me doing the production, and often I can do them in a day or two, have them up and available to the litigants, and not just self-represented litigants. I have attorneys who are new to post-judgment litigation and a lot of paralegal professionals who do this work for attorneys. So it benefits a whole community of litigants.
Spectacular. Judge Thompson, are we going to see you on YouTube soon or what?
Well, I have a slightly different version of it, but not on YouTube. And I like the ideas that Judge Ahmad has shared. When I was in state court, I would have rolling PowerPoints. When I was in either the domestic violence court, restitution, any of the specialty courts, so that the litigants, while they were waiting, they would know what the rules were. They knew what resources were in the community and could access that information. I think as judges, we have a lot of tools available to us, and maybe we need to think a little broader about how we can communicate with our community to make sure that they understand that even when I'm doing jury selection, I will have a PowerPoint that talks about hardships. It talks about what it is to serve as a juror. It talks about our schedule, which the reporters love because they know when a certain witness is coming. And it also outlines other aspects of the case so that they understand what the different phases of a case is going to entail. So I think we have a lot of resource available to us, and I'd love to see, to piggyback off of Judge Ahmad, is that now that I'm teaching again, realizing that most of my students are looking at social media, and it would be nice to have some dedicated civic education page that just talks about the different stages of different types of cases so that when people are coming into court, they know what to expect, especially our young adults, because that's where they get their information now. And so that, I think, would be something that we should really give some real thought to.
I'm curious, Your Honors, maybe Judge Fogel, do you ever feel like you're competing with Law and Order, or that everything has to be the way it is on TV, or portrayed in our pop culture?
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, I think which show I'm competing with has changed over time. When I was a new judge, which goes back a long way, I'm afraid the main show was Perry Mason, right? So the idea was that the defense lawyers had to identify who actually did it, in order to show that their client wasn't guilty. And so I would hear defense lawyers say, well, I'm not going to do that. That's not going to happen. And they would talk about the Perry Mason syndrome. And and now it's more like CSI and definitely Law and Order. And I always avoided watching those shows. I mean, I think Law and Order actually is a pretty good show, but in cases where there's forensic evidence, I think CSI's had a tremendous impact on what juries expect. How they expect the evidence to come in and be so I think the process does compete with that. I think popular culture does affect the way juries think and what the public thinks when they're dealing with things in court. One of the things that has always driven me crazy is that you cannot watch a movie or a TV show with a judge in it where they don't pound their gavel. They make an order and they say, the motion is denied, boom, and I was given a gavel when I became a municipal court judge in 1981. I don't think I ever used it, ever, in 37 years. And so, but that's a stereotype, and when I've had school classes come, I mean, I think the most fun one for me was a group of junior high school students who came once and they asked about my gavel. And they also were really interested in electronic monitoring. They watched my criminal calendar, and there was a defendant who was being released with electronic monitoring, and they all wanted to know about electronic monitoring. They had a ton of questions about electronic monitoring, about how does it work and what happens if you take the bracelet off and all this kind of stuff. And they wanted to go into the holding cell. There's just people are curious about all this stuff, and I think it's good that they are, but I think mass media can give somewhat inaccurate impressions. And so I think one of the challenges for judges is to try to say, no, you've seen that and that's entertainment, but that's not what we're doing here, and be careful not to confuse the two things. I think it's a good thing for judges to call that out.
Judge Mueller, what other barriers exist to this effort, or I guess maybe any resistance to change that you've encountered or you've overcome?
Well, I think that question makes me think of two things. But one barrier is that most of the public, for better or for worse, doesn't get into our courtrooms. A relatively few number of people serve on juries. Federal courts have a relatively small percentage of cases go to jury trial. If we get folks on a jury, it's incredible to watch juries operate. They're fulfilling their responsibility, exercising an important right. Every jury I've ever seen takes that job so seriously, and I feel as if it's a part of my duty when they are here to make certain they understand everything. Without, putting a thumb on the scale, without shading whatever their verdict may be, but very few people get into our courtrooms in that way. And so we don't have that opportunity. I'm confident that if not all, almost everyone who leaves my court after serving on a jury understands and has a better feeling about how we operate. So, it's not as if we can get everyone into the courtroom in that way, but how do we make up for that? And then the other limitation is the court resources. I mean, courts just don't have the resources to do this at the highest level, to do the public communications piece. And so you see individual judges, like the Judge Ahmads of the world, rising to the occasion and finding ways, and they can be models for us. But given the limited resources, given the concerns about hacking of our public dockets, given a lot of effort recently to try to work to protect sealed documents, we are constantly, often behind the scenes, doing things to make certain judges and the parties can just do their jobs day in and day out. And it's very difficult to allocate the time needed to do public communication in the best way possible. So that I do hope that there will be resources dedicated to building an infrastructure so that every court has access to some kind of program. And in the meantime, those who are able to figure out how to do it right can serve as role models for us.
Yes. And can I add one thing that I think is probably also on the minds of a lot of our colleagues, particularly when you're handling cases in the criminal calendars and when you're handling criminal trials, is making sure that the litigant has a fair trial, is making sure that jurors aren't predisposed, making sure witnesses aren't having access to information prematurely and somehow that influences how they present in the courtroom. And then finally, how the attorneys handle the case when the media is present, and are they focused on their client and the presentation of evidence, or are they a little seduced by the attention that they're getting from the media? That's something that a judge has to juggle with to make sure that at the end of the day, that the litigant has a fair trial. And I think that that's why having these types of forums and having these discussions really is helpful. And we have jurors who have trepidation about serving on a jury if they know the press is going to be present, and what kind of safeguards can be put in place so that they are encouraged to still participate in that option of being able to do probably one of the most important jobs they'll ever have when they're making a decision about another citizen in their community.
In addition to maybe a performative attorney, I've never seen one of those, but maybe you have. And this is a question inspired by something someone posted in the chat. Is there a concern, Your Honor, about trust? We seem to live in an era when institutions are not necessarily as trusted, perhaps, as they once were. Maybe yours, also for certain mine. Is that an active concern?
I think that's an individual question. For me, I try to cultivate a relationship with the professionals that come in my courtroom. If there are members of the press, particularly if I have a high profile case, I'll come out early and talk about what we're going to do that day, where people can be seated, whatever are the logistical things that I need to take care of. And then if my courtroom deputy gets questions, then we deal with that at the next appropriate break or the following day. So I think that there are cooperative ways in which these things can occur, but always keep in mind that the judicial officer is focused on the trial, their duties, and making sure that a fair trial is taking place. And so that's a lot of balance that goes on in those cases.
Judge Fogel?
Yeah, I agree with Judge Thompson. I think it kind of starts with the one-to-one relationships. I think, yes, there's a tremendous decline in trust in institutions. I don't think that's rocket science to say that. I mean, if you poll people, what do you think about the media? What do you think about the courts? What do you think about the bar? what do you think about the police? I mean, it's, there are variations depending on who you ask, but I think, overall, all of those institutions have suffered a decline in trust. But that said, I think it can be overcome when people have actually good concrete experiences with people. In other words, if you're just stereotyping based on what you've read or what you've seen on social media or what read on somebody's blog or heard on a podcast, I mean, you can form stereotypes, and then you actually interact with somebody and you have a meaningful interaction with them. I think that is, oh, well, that person wasn't nearly as bad as I expected them to be, or there's more. I mean, I can trust them more than I thought I could. And I think, well, I mean, I could get all philosophical about this, but I think one of the problems with our society at the moment is that people are very siloed. They're very isolated from each other. We don't have the kind of communities and connections that we used to have. And I think a lot of that was really accelerated by COVID. So, people spent a lot of time by themselves or a lot of time in their bubbles. And so we're dealing with a society in which people think kind of in a bubbly way, and I think the way you start to change that is to actually build relationships across bubbles. And I think that's what Judge Thompson was getting at. I mean, she's trying to run a trial and she's trying to do her job in as thoughtful and conscientious a way as she can. That involves reaching out to people and having like real interactions with people, regardless of what bubble they're in. And I think, I just think we all need to think about that. But I think judges as leaders in the community and as leaders in the courtroom are in a unique position to do that. I mean, everybody in the courtroom looks to the judge, and the judge can really set the tone and can model some of the behavior I'm talking about.
Judge Ahmad, is there ever any hesitancy that you feel because of that lofty position that Judge Fogel was talking about? Because another factor of our society is public figures that do come under threat, and we have seen awful examples. Does that ever enter into your mind as you're considering whether to engage or disengage?
It comes into my mind, but not as a factor in whether to engage or disengage. My philosophy is I'm going to engage no matter what. That's just who I am. And it's very important to me. That's why I took on this role to be a judge. I wanted to make a difference, and a perceptible difference to the justice system. Do I think about safety? Of course, all the time. I work in Chicago's Loop. I'm not in a secure area. Judges who work at my courthouse park in public parking, walk down the street. Many of us are very visible, not only in the courthouse, but through whether it's the media or just the community in general. But it's sort of like any other aspect of life. I won't let fear or concern impact or interfere with what I need to do.
On a happier note then, what are you excited about? Judge Mueller, what innovations are working? What do you want to see more of? And where, where is this conversation, if we had it a year from now, where's it going to be?
Well, I'm excited that this kind of conversation is happening because I think it needs to. And I think there are the examples of some PIOs in the federal system, more in the state system. There are examples of individual judges demonstrating how to do this right. There are some international examples of judges demonstrating ways to explain what they're doing, separate and apart from talking about a case over which they're presiding. And I think what's most exciting is that there is an awareness that we need to be figuring this out, that we are playing catch up, but we need to figure it out. And so by working together, by talking together, by sharing examples, we will be able to move this forward. And so I see this as a growing field. There are examples. The Bulch Judicial Institute at Duke Law is experimenting with some social media squibs about rule of law. So they're putting those out there, gathering information about what the responses are. Is that we can't compete with the mega influencers, but can we start to make some kind of impression that starts to register with the public at large? It is a time to not be silent. It is a time to find a way to articulate what matters, to not be cowed. I mean, it is the judge's creed. The point of judicial security is to give us the space in which to do our job, to decide cases in a fundamental, fair way, serving as that neutral that the parties have a right to. So I think the good news is what we are talking, there's a lot of work to be done. We haven't really referenced the civics education space, but that's another one. There are many examples. That provides an easier way for many judges to step out of their role, take off the robe, interact with the public. I think that's an important piece of what's going on, because that gives members of the public, students, a chance to see judges and understand they're real people too, and hear the judge talk about their job in that context. So there are many great examples of explaining the civic value of a neutral judiciary going on, and that excites me too.
Yeah, and if I could just tag on that, and I think Judge Mueller just very eloquently talked about something I'm really hopeful about too, which is that this is starting to happen. Judges are starting to get this. I mean, they're starting to get that they can't stay in their chambers and not engage with what's happening in the world. And so, I have two examples of recent in my life that I was very excited about. And one of them was very traditional. I went to a retirement home and talked to about 125 retired people about what was going on with the Supreme Court. And I had a wonderful time. I mean, they asked such good questions, and it was not, they weren't questions like, what's going to happen to, are they going to overrule, In Ray Humphrey's executor or something like that? It was like, what's the Chief Justice like? Or, when they write these snarky opinions, I mean, are they really mad at each other, or are they just kind of doing that for show? Questions where people are really curious about what's going on in the world, and they want to know more about it. And some of it was more practical than that, but I love the sense of curiosity, and I think they used the fact that I had been there and I had done that and could provide that. So that's sort of a more old-fashioned way to do civics education. I've also started doing podcasts, and this is like completely out of my comfort zone, but this is how young people, not just young people, but certainly it's how a lot of young people, they get their news, they get their ideas. And it's fascinating doing podcasts, and just like figuring out the back and forth with the hosts, and like, how do I deal with this different social reality that I'm dealing with? And I think I would like to see, and I think this is starting to happen. I think judges are figuring out that social media and podcasts and things like that actually are the way you reach a lot of people. You're not going to go back and teach high school civics again. I mean, you have to figure out some way to engage with people in the moment. So I think more judicial involvement out in the community and using the media that the community actually is using. I think, and I'm excited that both of those things are starting to happen.
I love it. We have YouTube stars, podcasting stars, PowerPoint stars. Fantastic. Judge Thompson, what are you excited about? What innovations are you seeing down the road?
I'm excited about a lot of things. I just returned to teaching, and my students really gave me a real education on how there's disconnects. And they're asking me, why are we using old solutions for new problems? And that really stuck with me, as I was talking to them. And there are law academies at the different high schools. They're looking for judges and attorneys to come in. It would be great if the media would come in and talk to these high school students about the role of covering different courtrooms and the courtroom drama. I think that would give them a more realistic platform as they're moving through their education. I'm excited about the fact that we're having this conversation and that maybe this will now develop both on a local level and a national level, a conversation with judges in the room and reporters in the room so that everyone can understand what some of the barriers are, but also what the possibilities are and what it is that you're concerned about. You've asked us what we're concerned about, but we haven't heard from the reporters what they're concerned about.
I mean, I walk around concerned about everything. So, um, Judge Ahmad, let me ask, when we come into your courtroom, um, what do you wish we would know that we probably don't, or that we're not getting right 100% of the time?
It's so basic, what I wish you would know, that judges are regular people.
That's not true.
Because there's a feeling, and I would say this is not just true about judges, more public people, that we are impervious to insults or disrespect, and that's not true. We have families, people we care about. We enjoy, most of us at least, enjoy our work and really want to do the right thing. And I would say give folks the benefit of the doubt or at least approach people with the belief that this person is really working to do what's right and do the best that they can, versus, as Judge Fogel was saying, his interaction initially with the reporter who thought something suspicious was going on or something is amiss. Give us the benefit of the doubt that actually, no, we too want to see a better world and a better judicial system. And then, you know what, Aaron, that may sound very Pollyannish, but that's what I think about a lot.
I'm here for it. Judge Mueller, similar question. When we walk in, what should we know? Because we've talked a lot today about, what the judge can do, but I realize the onus is sometimes on us too.
Well, I might put that back to you. I think my question would be, is there a way to communicate the importance of the process? At the touchstone of what we do is, the catchphrase is due process. But by the time we make it into the courtroom, we've read briefs most of the time. We have read cases. We are there to listen to the parties. And so, yes, there are going to be winners and losers. But that's not just what this is about. I like to think of courts as full-scale dispute resolution centers. We are a place for peaceful, nonviolent resolution of disputes. And we call citizen juries in when we need help with that in that way. But it's the importance of that process that hopefully allows a loser to feel, well, at least I was heard and I was understood. And I may have lost. I can appeal if I'm in the trial court. And I can tell you, I'm certain every single judge here, when you're in a courtroom in that three-dimensional space, it can happen too by Zoom, but really the live court, you can have interactions with parties, sometimes with victims, and you see the value of listening to that person. You can see it reflected in their body language, in their face, sometimes in what they say. So honoring that process, if there are opportunities for that, even as you're ultimately reporting on who won, who lost, and maybe the fireworks along the way, to me, that process is so important to what we do. And it's really hard for people to get that unless they're a litigant, a juror in the courtroom at the time.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example of a case that and it was a case that was 8 years ago, so it's certainly not a pending case. And it involved the first travel ban, the so-called Muslim ban, that was issued in 2017 by the administration. And the judge who handled the case was Jim Robart, who's a judge in Western Washington. He's a federal judge in Seattle, and he presided over the case. It was unusual for a federal proceeding, but it was actually televised. You could actually see the hearing where he, and there was an exception under a pilot program the Ninth Circuit had at the time, and so you could see the oral argument, and you could see the way he conducted the hearing and the way he rendered his decision. And the case blew up. It became a lot like a lot of the cases that we're seeing now, and it was very controversial. And he got a couple dozen credible death threats, and a million hits on social media and all this. The coverage of the case was really, well, who won? And they mentioned that it was surprising because he had been appointed by George W. Bush rather than a Democrat, and that he had made this decision. And so the focus was all on who won, who lost, what was the partisan legacy of the judge. And that was pretty much it, a lot of the articles. And I'm watching this and I'm just saying, wow. And I will admit I have a tremendous admiration for Judge Robart, so he's going to come through here. But what was really interesting was the way he conducted the hearing. To me, I mean, the way that he gave everybody just what Judge Mueller was talking about, the process. He listened, he asked questions, he heard what people said, he reflected it back. That there was something so. It was such a great role model. What you do when you have a high-profile, controversial case, that what you're trying to do is understand where the parties are coming from and make the best decision you can in accordance with the law. And I think the media writ large turns it into a political argument, just like it was an argument happening on the floor of Congress or something like that. I mean, who's going to win? What parties are in favor of what positions? And I think that's really unfortunate, because what he did was really different from that. I mean, there was a kind of careful deliberation and thoughtfulness toward people and active listening and all these things that we teach judges, that didn't get reported at all. And unless you saw the hearing, you'd have no idea that this is an incredibly conscientious judge that we should be proud of, And so I think that's a place the media has fallen down a little bit, to answer your question, Aaron. Yeah,
we'll take it.
Yeah.
So, given that, Judge Thompson, can I just read the first two graphs of your opinion and get everything I need to know, or do I need to read the whole nuanced 45 pages?
No, no, I am very conscientious of the press, and I try to make sure that I have clear headers, that I succinctly summarize things in the first paragraph if possible, and to really bring the human side to these cases. Because just as Judge Fogel mentioned, win or lose, we're all going to lose if we're not looking at the human condition, and that we have an opportunity now to really educate people on the fairness of the court, the conscientious way the court goes about its business, the fact that we are working very hard to apply the rule of law, and that we're trying to secure due process for everyone. And so in that introduction, I do try to convey what I think is the human side of the story and the human side of the order, so that individuals are reminded that we're not just robots writing things. We're actually looking at live, breathing human beings, and we don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to get it wrong. That is probably one of the things that I think all of my colleagues spend a great deal of time laboring over. Am I on the right side of this issue? And when we see something that's prefaced with, oh, this is a such and such appointee, or this is someone who has this going on. And just like Judge Ahmad says, we have families that we care very deeply about. We have children, we have grandchildren, we have elders who were very proud that we were able to get these positions. and are, concerned about us. And we know that as we've taken these jobs, we're part of the public fodder, but just as it was said previously, not our families. And that hurts deeply when they see something characterized that is so out of character from what they know, or when people see something characterized about a litigant that is drastically different than what the broad community knows about that individual. So I work really hard towards clearly communicating. I don't know if I always get there, but I do take pause. And when there is feedback from my colleagues that, well, you could have been a little more clear about this, I take it real serious and I take it to heart.
We also want to get it right. And so we share a common goal there. I'm mindful that we do have some time for audience questions, but if we could, before we get to those questions, share any last thoughts about anything we've discussed or what we may have missed. Judge Mueller, if you want to go first.
Here. Really, just I think the basic message is this community is a great resource. Everyone on this call, I'm watching the chat, and I'm glad to know that BJI will be posting a summary. We're part of a community nationwide that is thinking about this. I and colleagues in my not so well developed state need to learn how to get outside of our comfort zone. And I think there are paths for doing that. And, to follow up on Judge Thompson's, I care about whether or not my orders are understood, but do I have the time or do I take the time to make that a high priority? I can't say that I have. I wish I had someone else to write the syllabus for my cases. But it's really hard to add that to the individual judge's list of things to do before an order issues when the parties are waiting for it. So just to say once again, I do hope there's infrastructure, if not a full-time attorney at a local court to write a syllabus, there's more of an infrastructure to support us, let her do our jobs as judges, and let us take advantage of the tools that can help us do a better job of communicating to the public.
Judge Ahmad?
One of the things that I'm thinking more about, we talk about artificial intelligence, and that is how I can utilize artificial intelligence to do some of the things that Judge Mueller just said. For those of us who don't have clerks and don't have a lot of resources, how to leverage AI in a new way to serve as assistance to what we are doing. And that's what I'm starting to think about. That's sort of my next iteration of trying to look at deficits in the court and then leverage technology to fill in the holes for that lack. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Judge Thompson?
I'm really in deep thought about this in terms of moving forward, and I'm just kind of in deep pleasure that we're having this forum, and I hope there's going to be more of them. And I've taken away some things that I want to do, but I'm hoping that we're not just having this conversation, that there is going to be some active effort also from the press to engage us more, to ask us whether we can attend something that you're hosting so that we understand some of your challenges and we're in more dialogue about this. Because just like you said, we all want to get it right. And I have exceptional respect for the reporters that I know, because I know that they really labor over whether they're reporting the right information, because they know that in the balance, lives can be tragically affected, long-term affected. And so this has been a pleasure, and I'm just glad to be a part of this. So thank you.
Judge Fogel?
Yeah, well, I just am really honored to be part of this group. I know all these judges, and I'm very very happy to call them my friends. But I'm also just so impressed by what they've said, and I think it shows sort of an evolution of the way we are thinking as a profession about this topic. I think judges realize that they need to figure out a better way to work in this space. One thing that we used to do, and we haven't done it so much. I'm sorry, we used to do was have committees. We had my court had a bench media committee. My state court did, and our federal court did for a while. And it was we met every couple months, and there were journalists, both TV journalists and radio journalists and print journalists, and I think in the modern iteration we'd want bloggers and podcasters and stuff. But the idea is to get people in the room and have a completely off the record conversation with some judges that are interested in building these kinds of bridges. And I thought that was a great committee. We had some moments, we had some high profile cases in our court that could have really gone south quickly with access issues and who's getting preference and whatever. And it was a great opportunity to get to know people, not in the context of their coverage of a particular case, but really to kind of understand each other's thinking. And I was really lucky. I mean, one of the things that helped me in my career, I think, was when I was kind of coming of age in San Jose there, a lot of my friends were journalists. And I think, in social conversations, we would just talk about, we both trying to get the truth out. We had our jobs actually were complementary to each other. We didn't have to be adversarial, but it was really trying to understand how to do that. So I think more of that, more engagement is my takeaway from today.
Amen to all of that. Come on to New York, all of you, so I'd love to visit your courtrooms. Denise, how would you like to do questions?
So I think the first, I have to thank the people in the chat have put in fantastic things. I'm really, really grateful. I think there's only one question in the chat that really hasn't been answered, and it's a big one. How should the judiciary expand social media presence? I don't get to do this all the time, Aaron. Let's go to Judge Fogel first.
I knew you were going to do that, Denise. I just very predictable after 14 years. But anyway, I think you just have to do it. I mean, you have to have somebody who's savvy. So, Judge Ahmad comes to mind. I mean, somebody who has actually worked in that space, knows how it works, knows what its potential is, and say, look, we intentionally need to get more present in social media. And we need to think about how to do it in a way that's consistent with ethical canons. Some judges have gotten in trouble. There have been individual judges who have been, they've had their own Twitter feed or their own social media account, and they've gotten in the crosshairs of some ethical problems. I mean, there was a conversation at a circuit conference I was at a few years ago where someone suggested that, and they really got run out of the room. We can't do that. But actually, you can do that if you do it with thoughtfulness, and you say, well, what is it we're trying to use social media for? What is the information we're trying to get out, and what is it not for? It's not for sort of a public forum to say, well, the defendant's guilty, the jury better find the defendant guilty. So I actually think there is an opportunity there that judges and court people who are savvy can be thoughtful about and keep the ethical limitations in mind.
And please, Your Honors, if you'd like to jump and weigh in.
I'm a big proponent of social media. I've had so many law students first connect with law students via social media, particularly LinkedIn. 93% of all lawyers and judges are actually on LinkedIn, and not necessarily posting, but at least keep a site and monitor it. And for me, it has been an excellent tool to be contacted by law students. I've had law students sit in on my courtroom from all over the country. And it's a great platform to give encouragement and support, to be a role model, to not only as a jurist, but a role model as a legal professional, as a member of Cook County, Illinois, where I reside. The access that it can afford is much greater than I would be able to do just without it, or even if I relied on traditional media. So it's an indispensable tool for those of us who do want to be visible and communicate what's going on here in not only the courts, but in the professional life of someone like myself. It's an important tool.
Your Honor, if I may, at the suggestion of my friend Emily Saul at the New York Law Journal, is social media an appropriate way to contact you, to engage with you, to try and build a relationship? Do you prefer email? Do you like a phone call?
So I don't communicate regarding cases, just the same rules apply. I'm not, every now and then someone might attempt to ask a legal question or something like that. And I just explain, it gives me the opportunity to be a teacher, to explain, no, this is not what judges do. Judges aren't permitted to speak about a case or a particular issue that could come before them. It gives me a great opportunity to teach what is and is not appropriate. So for me, because I emphasize the for me part, because I have so many colleagues who run away from me anytime I bring up social media. But if used responsibly, as Judge Fogel indicated, and within the rules, our rules of professional conduct are broad enough to include a presence on social media.
And specifically to your colleague's question, Aaron, I've always responded best to email, because the email can explain who the person is, why they're contacting me, what they hope to accomplish from the contact. And I can usually tell a lot from the email, whether it's somebody I want to connect up with or not. And I think most of the relationships I have with journalists started that way.
And I wanted to just point out, when I'm referring to contact, for example, LinkedIn has a message function, which is
That's right.
which is email.
Yeah, it's email. Yeah.
So it's not public.
Yeah.
It's a offline communication,
right.
and that is an appropriate way
Mhm.
to reach out.
Mhm.
I've had plenty of attorneys, law students, community members. Hey, can you come and speak to our group about this? They wouldn't be able to reach me otherwise.
Mhm.
So it's a great tool.
That's right.
You're all about to get a bunch of email from a bunch of reporters, I think.
I would just add to that, if the judge is not a chief judge, the presiding administrative judge, you can go to the chief or the clerk of court or the judge's assistant and see if you get a response that way. Also attending bar events. If the federal bar has an annual Supreme Court review, attend that. Those are open, even if the bar is the primary audience. So I think there are ways to show up and demonstrate sincere interest, not an attempt to engage in a gotcha, and over time find at least one or two people who will respond and engage with you.
Thank you all very much, Your Honors. Justin, I believe you have the floor to close our session.
Yes, I just want to thank everybody for attending today's program and everybody who has been active in our chat. Especially want to thank our faculty, Mr. Katersky, judges Ahmad, Mueller, Thompson, and Fogel for sharing their participating in this program and sharing their expertise with all y'all. Again, thank you, and we look forward to see you in the next one.
Stay well, everyone.